one thing Shine was ranting about was, could Josh McDaniels just be a one and done coach for the Raiders? And, I think we've kind of talked about it, but I haven't really paid that much mind because it costs money to do that. And I would be surprised if Mark Davis paid him the money to do that. But could Josh McDaniels be a one and done?
I think the number would have to be pretty bad. I think it would have to be 5 or lower.
Well, at this point, what have they won? 2?
I would say that conversation gets really, there's some tangible parts to like the argument if you lose to the Jacksonville Jags like this week, right? So you go back-to-back, lose to the Saints and the Jags that everyone thought sucked. Like the Saints, I just saw some people tweeting like their defensive statistics going into the game were terrible, and then they just dominate the Raiders like they're a high school team. I saw Josh Norris, that works for NBC, tweet out before you and I hopped on that Andy Dalton had a clean pocket in 93.3% of his dropbacks that game. Like he was untouched. Their team is just terrible. Like it was, if they keep just being kind of gutless, because early on, a lot of people were defending him like, well, the eye test is not as bad as the result. And I think there was some validity to that, right? Like the Chiefs game. That was not a bad loss. At Kansas City, Monday night, that was not a bad loss.
1 point game.
I think Arizona was a pretty shitty loss. Up 20-0 against gutless Kyler for him to come back. And I understand.
At home. Like I don't underrate things happening at home.
The following week against the Titans, I'm pretty sure they did not have a point early in the first. I don't think they scored in the first half, or they definitely were down like 17-3 and had to come back to even make it a game. Because remember, you and I were texting when Derek's leading them on the 2-point drive and he scores, but then they don't get the 2-point conversion. But when you're in situations like that, you're in situations like that because you're trailing, and they had been trailing the whole game. So, yeah, I think you do have to factor in that the team showed last year they had a good core. The quarterback was solid. And then they added Devontae Adams. It's like, it's hard to suck as bad as they suck with their roster, I think.
Added Devontae Adams, hired kind of a coach that everybody thought was an automatic. No, I shouldn't say everybody thought that. That it felt like the Raiders were saying, okay, we're going to go big. We're going to do this right. And then it's failing immediately.
I do wonder. I mean, I guess it's been a little while now, but right. He did spurn the Colts. Even if you wanted to give a guy benefit of the doubt, he got a job way too early and then he figured it out. I think Lane's a pretty good example, who got handed a lot early and wasn't ready for it and kind of crumbled on him. And you just watch Lane operate now. Like, the guy's fucking pretty good. I mean,
everybody
Lane's
thinks
just
Auburn next coach.
Which to me, like, why wouldn't you just wait for a better job than that? Like, wouldn't you just stay at Ole Miss? What the hell? What's the difference between Ole Miss and Auburn?
People seem to think Auburn, maybe they have a lot more money. I think their NIL money is pretty big. I mean, you can win a national championship there.
Okay, you're right. But if you did take it, it'd be like, that's a hell of a... They just hired Lane Kiffin. Like, there's tangible results. Like, Lane wins. He won at Ole Miss. He won at FAU. Saban's like, listen, he drove me nuts, but we won national championships with Lane Kiffin.
Fired him before one, but
like, really, Josh, when he's been under the umbrella, it's just let him coach the playoff game, right? Didn't give him the semis.
I thought it was between the semis and the title game.
Or did they boot him the SEC championship game?
Before the semis?
Did they boot him like the day before the SEC championship game? Remember, it was weird. You're right. Got weird at the end. They had Stark on staff. There's a chance Josh McDaniels is a really terrible head coach, which is kind of crazy because you hear him talk. He kind of sounds like he's got it going on. You've watched him coach with the Patriots. He felt like he had it going on.
Played for him. They're like, God, he's really one of the top coordinators, really smart, which is different than being a head coach.
I have a buddy who's like a number 2 or 3 kind of in his organization to the GM, who worked for the Patriots for a long time and was like, listen, I have no problem questioning the Patricias and the judges. Just like, that was pretty crazy. Those guys I knew most people thought they would suck, besides like Bill probably. But he's like, no one that's ever been around Josh as a scout, as a player, as a coach on that staff, Bill obviously included, in the Kraft family, that you don't go like, this guy's big time in the building. Bill is the driver, but like Josh meant a lot. The way Tom talked about him too.
Yep.
Felt like Tom revered him, didn't it?
It's like they really respected him. it's good news and bad news for the Raiders, right? The good news, you play the Jags, you play the Colts, you play the Broncos. These are teams you should be able to beat.
Well,
But
Mark can afford to fire him. I think it just comes down to, do you think he's just an utter disaster as a head coach?
well, I mean, 2 meetings 7 weeks in with the head coaches. Can you imagine Josh? Does Josh want to have meetings with Mark Davis after games?
In fairness to Mark, what do you think Josh making? $10 million a year, probably?
Yeah, I'm just saying.
If I'm Mark Davis, I'm just not allowed to talk to you after I just fucking watch you lose 24-0 against the Saints.
I agree. There's a difference between not allowed to talk to you and like when you start. I'm just saying it tells us something about the situation, right? When you have those conversations.
I do wonder with this team, the expectations were so high. Mark was kind of feeling himself. Mark's a champion now. Las Vegas Aces, never forget. First championship in Vegas since Tark in the early 90s. So he views himself as a winner, and he should. I mean, that Aces championship was incredible. Haberman watched every minute. And you just watch your football team.
Big fan.
You watch your football team who won games last year. I mean, like, incredible games.
Well,
that Week 18 game is an all-time win.
That was one thing about
the biggest Raider win guy. And what do you think? I mean, since the Gruden era, the first time, that win on Sunday Night Football with everyone watching against the Chargers.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking big. I mean,
bigger than they had
the Thanksgiving win was pretty big
last year.
Yeah,
the Colts win. Remember on the road when
the Thanksgiving win was like, you guys are dead. I said they're dead, right? They were not going to be a playoff team, and then they won that game.
The Cowboys.
Yeah,
they had 3. I mean, the Cowboy win, the Colts win, the Monday night that I think was on like Tuesday or Wednesday against the Browns, where they beat them in overtime, and then the cream of the crop win for the season was, I mean, that's Charger.
Wait, the Browns win was last year? That wasn't 2020?
The Browns game was last year. Yeah, it was a rich game.
Oh. That was one of the things that Shine made me cackle. I'd kind of forgotten. He's like, you just kicked Rich Bisaccia to the curb for this?
Which I think most owners would have taken Josh over Rich.
I supported. But it is like you said earlier when we were talking about Trey Lance. Like, that is what happened.
When Devontae Instagrammed yesterday, like a picture of him in a Raider uniform, and the quote was like, if it was easy, everyone would do it type deal. Yeah. Well, actually, Devontae, I mean, most guys just don't have the talent to play in the NFL. But part of it, and I get it's a tough spot for him because, like, his story, he's a Hall of Fame talent, and his career, the Green Bay Packers are probably a top 10 brand in all of America when it comes to sports. Any sport, clearly the NFL, their brands are bigger than beside like the Lakers and like the Yankees. And you see the Warriors actually surpassed the most expensive, through the valuation. And I was like, if Steph Curry just retired tomorrow, does that thing get cut in half? But I understand what they were talking about. He left the Packers for the Raiders. And it feels like he's in irrelevancy now and kind of like he's a part, it's not necessarily his fault, of just an embarrassment. When the Packers are probably going to win like 8 games this year, and it's going to be the most disappointing thing that's ever happened to the franchise, right? Like, you're part of the Raiders. Now, ultimately, like, you're going to win 5 games and people are going to say you underachieved or whatever, but at the end of the day, you are the Raiders, and you've lost a shitload over our adult lives. Since we've been in high school, guy, they have consistently lost. When they've won, it's been outliers. They made the playoffs twice in 20 years. The Packers literally made the playoffs all the time, hosted playoff games. And he was easily he was the Robin, but it wasn't like you're playing Robin as some random Batman, to like one of the great Batmans in NFL history, and definitely one of the more famous players. Like, he was a key cog with the brand, the winning, the success, the relevancy of the league. And it was one thing, well, the Packers were only going to give him half that amount of money. No, they've even said, like, we would have given it to him. He just told us he wanted out. So we just said, okay. And a huge part of him wanting out was to play with this guy who's one part of Shine's rant is he's having a shitty season. Like, you just watch him, it feels off. I feel like I haven't even watched the Raiders as much as I have in years past.
This last week?
It was unwatchable.